Bricks and Minifigs is your one-stop shop for all things LEGO. Hit the link below to find a store near you.
Hello again, I'm Jim Beute. I'm one of the hard luck guys. This is my take on the old-timey battleship, the USS Arizona. Arizona nowadays is known for being the ship that was sunk at Pearl Harbor, and she was damaged so badly. Of course, she was one of the two boats that didn't get raised and refit and sent back out into the fight. So she rests right where she sunk, and she's a war grave for the guys that didn't get off the ship. And there's a memorial that's over top of her now, and you can look down onto the top of the ship, and that's a weird, eerie experience to see that. So when most people think of Arizona, they'll think of that memorial or the iconic photograph right after the attack, and she's got black smoke billowing out, and her masts are all messed up. But this is how I like to think of her. She was a beautiful ship back in her day. A little bit more of a 19th century dreadnought than a 20th century battleship, but that was her place in time. She was a stepping stone between them. So she's got a lot of those old-timey features on it, and if you want a quick tour of the ship, I'll tell you about some of them features. All right, if we start out up front, at the very front, she's got this weird old-timey ram-style bow where the bottom of the ship that's underwater sticks out way farther than the ship that's above the water. And I think she was our last battleship that had that, although it's making a comeback with our new Zumwalt destroyers, so we'll see where that goes. Lots of anchors up here. In her day, the Navy wasn't really explorers anymore, but they were pioneers. So when they'd pull into a port, they couldn't rely on the infrastructure and the piers, so they were planning on anchoring out. So lots of anchors, lots of anchor chain up front. The shape of her bow, she's got this staggered bows with these casements here. In the old dreadnought days, that's where they put her secondary armament, and that's where the little 5-inch guns were. That turned out to be a wet, miserable, dangerous place for those gun crews to be, so they moved them back and moved them up, but they kept that shape in the bows. Her main armament, 14-inch guns. When she was built in like 1914, that was as big as it got, and for the U.S. Navy to put 3 of those in a turret and put 4 of those turrets on a ship, this was a powerhouse. In her day, she was the strongest thing floating. Moving back, she got her secondary armament. You see the little guys moving back and forth, and I'm sorry, I've got little motion here for the turrets, and I'm not paying attention here. For her secondary armament, the bottom layer of 5-inch guns, those were anti-surface protection. Top layer was anti-aircraft guns. It's got platforms sticking out on the sides. That was where the leadsman would stand. This is before sonar, before fish finders and fathometers. So to tell how much water's under your ship, they would throw the lead lines off from these platforms. So a lot of those old-timey things. She had an armored citadel here, which was a good place to command the ship, and you didn't have to worry about artillery coming in. Above that's the navigation bridge, better place to drive the ship. On her mast, she's got things that look like radars. They're all actually optical rangefinders because this is before radar. Going up the mast, the weirdest thing, they've got a 3-story house on top of the mast up there. And that's a good place where the crews could sit and they could see all around, they could see all the threats, and they would choose which targets to tell the batteries to go shoot. So the control of the batteries was in these 3-story houses that were up on top of the ship. Moving farther back, smokestack, the most revolutionary thing. And I was an engineer, so it was exciting to me. No one else will think it's cool. She was one of the first ships that had oil instead of coal, and that was just a huge game changer. But again, not as exciting as guns and weapons and things like that. But oil in the steam engines was a really cool thing. She got a ton of small boats, literally a boatload of small boats there. I cheated. There's probably 5 or 6 more I should have made, but I got lazy. But again, when they pulled into port, they couldn't rely on stuff. So if you want to move your groceries on board or move your ships, you had a whole bunch of small boats. Big cranes to move those boats on board. Moving up the mast here, again, more searchlights, no radar. So a nighttime attack was a frightening thing for them. So they had tons of searchlights and things like that. Going farther back on the after turrets, you see a catapult up there. This is early days of integrating aircraft with the ships. So these Kingfisher seaplanes on them. They shoot one off the after turrets, and sorry, I go there. And so they fire them off those turrets, and then they have one with a dedicated catapult back there and a crane to put her back on. Sorry, that's more operational history than you probably wanted. Shift gears here. I'm sorry. I'll let you take it.
That was an excellent overview there. Thank you so much. I think one of the obvious questions you walk up to this is the red that stands out on top of the turrets here. So explain the reasoning for that.
This is funny. I had a gentleman in here who was a historian, and he said, "Hey, you got it right." I said, "Oh, good. Tell me about it," because he literally wrote a book about it. They would paint the tops of these turrets, and it was to help the aviators recognize which ship to get back to, because they'd all launch a scout plane, and where do I go? and it is a complicated scheme, but the front two turrets were the color of the battleship division that they were in, and the back turret was the color of the specific ship within the division. So the pilot would see, oh, red, red, and red. Oh, that must be Arizona with Battleship Division 1. It's probably more complicated than needs to be, but that's how they did it. It helps them get back to where they need to be. All right. You want to talk about the build a little bit, or you got again mostly snot built? We've done this before. Going along the sides, there's that technique where you can, bow the shape of the hull by putting plates on top of tiles there. Doing snot built with a teak built deck on this, it gives you a satisfying look of. It looks like there's wooden planks on there. These tripod masts were a lot of fun with the rounded bricks and the mixel joints underneath there to give me those fun angles to actually make the tripod masts go where they needed to be. And again, when you build them this big, there's lots of room for motors under the hood for making the turrets go lefty-righty and uppy-downy. And if you want to look at that, we can.
Yeah, that'd be awesome if we can dive a little bit more into that.
Surely, if it's okay with you. So the big turrets, it's the same old scheme as we've had before, where there's a motor in the turret that goes uppy-downy. And then under the hood, I try to learn from each build. I tell myself I'm capable of learning. I thought it was an excellent way to make it simpler. Instead of having a big, long gear train, I had one motor on one axle. And again, a way to just pull this stuff off and one long axle with a worm gear to turn both of them at the same time. Turns out I didn't remember that the axles are a little flexible, so they don't exactly track. But that's how we get the big ones to go. All these little guys, I've essentially got a rat's nest of gears underneath there. We'll just do this quickly. We won't take up too much of your time on that. But it's something that the guys that were interested like to see, so I've made it so we can tear these things out. But there's just a single small motor driving a single little oscillating gear, and then just distribution of all that motion back and forth to make all the little anti-aircraft and secondary battery stuff go lefty-righty. Sorry, that's probably more than you wanted under the hood.
That's absolutely fantastic. It's great to see how that comes together, especially when you have all this movement going on as well. I think that's super interesting.
All right. No, we have fun. I enjoy building the ships. In fact, I built this, if you remember, a couple years ago, I built the Japanese carrier that was actually her nemesis that sunk her, and you said, what's next? And I said, well, I'm going to turn it around to your viewers. What's interesting, guys? And several of them came back with, hey, try the Arizona, dummy. And the more I looked, the more I liked. So gave it a try, and it's a beautiful ship. It's just an old ship, that's all.
So I know you took us through kind of a lot of the functions of the ship, and as you mentioned, sinking at Pearl Harbor is unfortunately kind of what it's most famous for. But before that, what was the Arizona involved in? Where had the Arizona gone?
Boy, you put me on the spot. No. Well, she was a battleship, so a powerful big gun battleship, and she spent her time in lots of different battleship divisions. She was, again, the first oil-fired ship, and the logistic train to put, oil where the Navy needed it kept her limited for where she could go. So she was one of those trailblazers. So the coal-fired ships could go off to the North Atlantic for the end of World War I and things like that. But she cruised around mostly in the Pacific as a battleship, projecting power and preventing war from breaking out by being there with those big guns as a deterrent to war for most of her life. And again, just unfortunately that when World War II came around, she was getting a little long in the tooth. She was one of our older ships, so she wasn't one of those frontline battleships. And because she got damaged so badly, she wasn't worth fixing. So they left her where she was at.
Now, this is quite a large size. How long is this build here?
Just shy of 8 feet long. Yeah.
So I know you've built a lot of ships in the past. How do you normally decide that scale when you tackle these projects?
The size of the pile of my bricks, and to be quite honest, I'll pick something that has to be right, something that I can't back myself into a corner with. And the width of the main gun barrel is usually that, because you can't have that too wide or too narrow because the whole ship looks goofy. So generally, if I make the main gun barrel be one stud wide, scale everything up for that. For this, it ends up being just about 100 to 1 for the scale. But I'm not one of those smart guys that chooses a scale and then goes with it. I pick the most awkward part that I can't get wrong, and I just scale up from that.
No, that works. So then you get into some of these more detailed sections, and it's very layered here. So as you're putting that together, does that fall apart on you very often? Is there kind of experimentation of how you can get all that stacked up?
Yes, and again, you've heard me before. My world is more trial and error than plan and do it once. But yeah, I will quite often find, oh rats! In order to get the top layer to work, I got to go revisit the bottom layer. And these rotten lifelines and life rails they're a detail I don't like, but you got to have them, especially up higher. So it was a lot of trial and error and a lot of revisiting. Fortunately, going with a snot-built scheme that I've done several times before, I guess there's a few tricks of the trade that I was able to employ and keep myself generally out of trouble.
Yeah, you get a lot of kind of the tiles on the outside that you're able to stick on and kind of create those metal edges.
That's it, and the jumper plates particularly along the side of the ship. In fact, this ship, again, one of their old-timey features, just tons of portholes down the side of the ship, and a jumper plate, snot built sideways gives me a pretty good looking porthole at this scale. So yeah, just little tricks that you can do with that scale.
So with that experience under your belt, how long does it take you to put together a ship like this, would you typically say that you spend on this?
This guy's about 3 months. I work a couple hours a day. Again, I'm an old retired guy, so I work off my wife's list, and after that I get to go build. But yeah, a couple hours a day, and on over 3 months, I can put something like this together.
And has the movement been running pretty smoothly for you at the show here?
It's been great. My only dilemma, using infrared channels back here, I got one of my infrared channels hijacked by a friend earlier, and I'm sitting over here talking, and my after turrets are just driving themselves into the deck to the point where the turret tops pop off. And okay, stop that. Leave channel 2 alone over there, because Jim's got that for his after turrets. But the mechanical linkage works just fine.
Excellent work as always. It's always a pleasure seeing your builds, no matter what you do. I love hearing about the history, and just the level of build techniques that go into these are fantastic. So you mentioned you kind of took some viewer suggestions in the past. Are you open to other ideas in the future? Do you have any plans yourself at this point?
I am always open to ideas, and in fact, it worked out great exploiting your popularity to get some suggestions, because it was a cool ship I wouldn't have looked at without that. So yeah, if anybody wants to see something, yeah, throw it out there. Although I think I'm going to shift gears. I'm going to try some spaceships for a while. I've done a bunch of ships, and yeah, we'll see how it goes.
As much as I love, historical naval warships, I'll allow it. I'm sure it'll be some great work in the future. No matter what you do, I think it'll be fantastic. So thank you.
Oh, hey, thanks for your patience. Thanks for your time.